Take First Alert. Welcome to This Week in Kansas with your host, Tim Brown.
Hello and welcome to This Week in Kansas. Thank you for being with us this morning. One Republican lawmaker says the state government was on the verge of collapse. Another says the activity in Topeka was madness, but by a razor-thin margin, the Kansas Senate passed the tax plan from the House by a 21-19 vote. The new plan increases sales tax, does not cut food sales tax, and helps raise about $384 million. Will this avert a financial crisis in Kansas? And will the Judge Riddel Boys Ranch make a comeback? Some Sedgwick County Commissioners want it to be reopened. How would that happen? With plenty to talk about this morning, we'll just jump right in with the budget and taxes and the activity in Topeka. It's been a busy week.
Well, you know, I mean, once the water breaches the dam, it breaks rather quickly. Mm-hmm. And okay, we're taping on Friday night. Last night, well, this morning at 4 a.m. The House got their bills passed by the slimmest of margins, 63 votes. And, you know, what did we say earlier? It's trying to find the magic formula of 63 in the House and 21 in the Senate, something the governor will sign. And
they just
barely got it done. It was a very difficult time for many, a very emotional time for some. Even on the floor of the House, there were those that, I wouldn't want to say broke down, but certainly had their emotions boil out when they're at the lectern or whatever. And of course the governor also was pleading with his Republican colleagues to get something done and get it done quickly. They were under a significant amount of time pressure. I thought it was kind of funny that not a single Democrat voted for either of these bills. The reality is, though, that I think they're planning on the 2016 cycle rather than governing at this point. You know, I've been in a position, too, when I was in the legislature, to really have some difficult choices to make. And the real question for them at that stage was, do we want to be at the table? Do we want to have some effect? Or do we just want to roll grenades across the aisle and see if it blows up well enough? And I think they chose to roll grenades. And that's what I heard Anthony Hensley and his colleagues doing all afternoon as I listened to the Senate debate online.
Yeah, I think you can hardly say the Democrats were the only ones. There were a lot of Republicans that didn't vote for this.
Absolutely.
This disaster
absolutely.
Too.
But a majority of the Republican caucus voted for it. They got enough votes to get it done. They had to do something. Yeah. You know, we've talked about this before. It's easy to run on principle, but it's awfully hard to govern. And they were faced with a Hobson's choice. Mm-hmm. Because the alternatives had been laid out before them by the budget staff and some of the governor's staff. And the governor said, you know, that $400 million for universities looks really familiar to what our shortfall is. I could just do that with one little line item and be done with this. There were also the conclusion being drawn that if we don't get this fixed, if we don't raise enough revenue, then 6% across the board, which would have been very difficult for many to do too.
Well, that would have been hard. And Bob, I think the governor, the governor really had all the cards at the end in this thing. I believe. I mean, some people may disagree with that, but I think he did. And really, probably and we've talked about this in the past. I think the governor, his plan, and probably the easiest thing for him to be would have been say, okay, we'll just do that 6.25 or 6.5, whatever it was. Mm-hmm. Across the board reduction, and it's not my fault. The legislature couldn't come up with a plan, so I just had to do what I had to do. That would have been real easy to do.
And he still has a couple cards in his vest. You know, he does have line item veto authority over the budget, so if he sees anything in there he still doesn't like, he can just cross it off with his pen. The legislature will still have a chance to override that veto. Speaking of governing on principle, you know, there's quite a few members of both the House and the Senate who have absolutely violated pledges they signed with the Grover Norquist Americans for Tax Reform and also Americans for Prosperity, the local chapter here in Kansas. There's also the spectacle of hearing Republicans who railed against Governor Parkinson wanting a sales tax increase a few years ago when revenue was down because of the recession, now, you know, in voting for an increased sales tax. One thing that may come out of this is there was quite a bit of interest in the proceedings the whole past month or so. If you followed the Twitter feed, the hashtag KSLEG that is dedicated, each state has pretty much that type of hashtag. there were hundreds and hundreds of tweets per hour at times when the legislature was debating. Some of these are from well-known reporters, Brian Lowry of the Wichita Eagle, reporters from the Capitol Journal and Kansas City Star and so forth, tweeting about what's going on. And then others are advocates on both sides, although I do have to say that the advocates on the more spending, more taxes side far outnumbered those who urged restraint in spending. And sometimes it was only me, I think, and one other person. So
Bob was getting lonely.
Aww.
But so it was quite a spectacle, I think. And you know, when they talk about the sausage making, I think we got a dose of that. Will that lead to any type of lasting reform? You know, I think when a week or so ago, when we were coming up on the deadline where non-essential state employees might have to be furloughed, all of a sudden they passed a bill and the governor signed that says, okay, everybody's an essential employee. And when they can just flip the meaning of words like that, then I think people start to question really the legitimacy of what happens in our state government sometimes.
Well, and let's kind of call this for what this is. This is well, I want to get your opinions, both of you. Was this a good bill?
It was as good as they could get. That's what it was. It was as good as they could get.
Good as they could get with the threat of the governor's veto. Is that what you're saying?
No, it was as good as they could get.
I disagree
straightforward.
100%.
Just the only way they could
it's a
find
terrible
63 votes and 21 in the Senate. And, you know, I mean, there was a lot of people describing what was going on as blackmail, which was really kind of a bad way to say coercion, which was really going on.
What's the difference?
Oh, there's a big difference. Blackmail's illegal. And well, I mean, you know, look, you're the okay, you are leadership, all right? And you've got somebody that you have given a wonderful thing to called committee chairmanship.
Yeah.
And you expect that person to have loyalty is a two-way street, and when the push comes to shove and you're in a tough spot, you expect those who are supposed to be loyal to you to pick up the standard and bear it farther.
Sure.
And when you're a committee chairman and you kind of go to the the leadership, they don't react rather well to that.
I don't think anyone's ever done that on this show.
Well, you know, I could think of something else. But
yeah, don't do that, please.
Okay. I saw it in a Disney movie the other day, but anyway, it's the nature of the beast. And the sausage making is probably the best descriptor that we can use, and that's clearly what it was.
And it was really laid bare this time. I think a lot of people saw some of the inner workings, some of the ugly stuff that...
Well, yeah, I mean, when they're yelling at each other on the floor of the House and others are watching, and it's like the leadership of the two chambers, and, and then one of them says, well, we're just not going to meet tomorrow.
Yeah.
There was also just some misinformation floating around. There were people who believed that the sales tax plan was going to apply sales tax to residential apartment rents and that everybody's rent would go up by 6.5%. I could find nothing in the bills or the explanatory material from legislative research that said that. There was also a representative from Wichita who kind of led a group of a couple dozen House members who were willing to partially reinstate the tax on pass-through business income, the LLC. Yep. And then he gave up that fight. Well, there were rumors that he had some sort of provision that benefited the industry he was in. Again, I could find nothing like that. So there's a lot of kind of rumoring and misinformation like that going around, and that makes it harder for people to understand things too.
We have to take a commercial break now, guys, but when we come back, I do want to get your thoughts, Bob, on whether this is a good bill or not, because I think we know Phil's best as it could be. Yeah. I want to get yours in a minute, Bob. We'll be back.
Next Sunday, get ready for the new Gladiators.
BattleBots is a new sport of the 21st century.
Only one will rise to take the title.
It is a knockout!
BattleBots premieres next Sunday, 9/8 Central on ABC.
It's Mattress Firm's Sleep Happy Summer Sale. Get all the hottest deals on the coolest mattresses, like Sealy Posturepedic Firm Queen Sets for just $399.99. And get interest-free financing for 4 years. Plus, get up to $300 in Mattress Firm Cool Cash with purchase of an Optimum, Tempur-Pedic, or Beauty Rest Black Hybrid mattress set. Good towards free delivery, free accessories, and a free frame. We guarantee you'll sleep happy on your new mattress or your money back. So don't miss Mattress Firm's Sleep Happy Summer Sale.
We want you to capture Cakeland. Go to cake.com and submit your photo. It could be a sunset, a family outing, or any other snapshot of the good life in Cakeland. You never know. I might just share it on GMK.
Capture Cakeland, brought to you by All Seasons Construction.
And welcome back. We're talking budget bills, what the House and the Senate did in the past 24 hours or so, and all kinds of activity in Topeka these last few hours, these last few weeks for that matter. But Bob, I wanted to get your opinion on whether or not this is a good bill or a bad bill, or what do you think?
Well, I think by and large quite a bad bill. The first thing I would object to is the increase of the sales tax in Kansas. Now, there's some benefits to consumption taxes. For example, the fair tax on a national level has quite a bit of appeal, but that tax has what's known as a prebate, where you get a rebate each month, I think it is, to compensate you for the sales tax on necessities of life such as food. And last year, when Wichita considered the 1 cent per dollar sales tax, I did the research using census figures and proved what everybody kind of already knows, is that sales taxes on foods are very regressive. Low-income households spend a great deal more of their income on that tax than do upper-class and middle-class families. So I think Kansas really needs to look towards reducing or eliminating the sales tax on food, and maybe increasing the sales tax on it.
We don't decrease the food, and that was one of the provisions in the original Senate.
And it would have reduced it by a half or 1% per dollar.
But it's
so,
something.
Yeah, very, very small type of relief. And the other thing that that I'm not happy about is that 3 years ago we made the decision to reduce tax rates, and at that time you can go back, you can find the quotes from the governor saying now we've got to start trimming the cost of government. You can find the things I wrote, the things Kansas Policy Institute wrote, and others, but the legislature has done very little to prepare for this day. Now, you have to remember, when we talk about a balanced budget, did we have a balanced budget last year? No, because, I mean, technically we did, because you could take the ending balance and that counts as part of money available to respend. But when you look at last year's budget, what was brought in through taxation and other sources and what was spent, the budget was nowhere near in balance last year. We coasted by on the ending balance, and that really wasn't available this year.
Well, and the other thing I want to remind people too, when we look at this $383 million figure, the governor made the comment that we've already decreased spending and we've cut $400 million. Well, we really didn't cut $400 million.
That other $400 million,
we took a lot of money out of the...
Some came from the highway fund. Yeah. But you remember the highway fund gets 16% and some fraction of all the sales tax revenue. That's up from 11% just a few years ago. But some of that money came back, and there were some other adjustments that got the first 400, and then what happened this week got the other roughly 400.
Here's why I think this is a lousy bill, and I want both of you to comment on this. And Phil, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, I'm sure. Maybe.
We'll try.
But here's why I think this is a lousy bill and this is a lousy plan, and has been from the very start. When the governor started this whole situation 3 years ago, he said he was going to cut taxes on business owners to increase the economic output from these business owners. We're going to get more business in, more people will be hired, and that sort of thing. And it really has not worked out the way the governor planned. And that's just a fact. I mean, you can look at the growth that we have in our state versus the states surrounding us. We lag behind all of them. The national growth has gone up, so that by the force of the fact that the economy in general has gotten a little bit better, I think ours has gotten a little bit better. So we've seen those increases, but not really the increase that the governor had hoped for and had promised, and his economic advisors had promised. So we have that. We cut those taxes, we got that money out. And as Bob said, and I think this is 100% right on, if you are going to do that, and we did that 3 years ago, that's the time to start reining in spending. If you're going to do this, now I'm not saying that's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, but if that's the track you're going to take, which we did, now's the time to start reining in spending. We didn't. And here we go. So now we're to the point where we're in this big hole. So we've taken away taxes from one group over here, these business owners, these LLC folks. They don't have to pay Kansas income tax. And what we've done is it's basically a shell game. We've taken the money away from here. We had to get the money from somewhere else. So where do? We do it through a sales tax and some of these other regressive taxes, which hit poor people. That's just a fact. Again, you can't argue against that. So we've got people over here that aren't paying. We've got people over here that are going to pay more. And it's not fair, and it's not a good way to do business.
And the
That's my
passage
opinion.
of the bill in 2012 that eliminated this was really an example of bad sausage making, I think. But also the cost of that was much greater than anticipated. Remember, we were told that there'd be 191,000 businesses that exempted from this. And by the way, they're not all rich. A lot of these are small, struggling businesses that may not have much profit at all. But now we're told there's 330,000 businesses that took advantage of this, including farmers. So why didn't we know that the farmers would be eligible for this? So it seems like maybe it wasn't thoroughly vetted 3 years ago when it was passed.
Phil, am I wrong?
What can I say? No.
You can say I'm right.
Okay. You know, when we look at the Kansas economy, it's pretty clear that there's a track record that we run about 18 months behind the curve on the national economy. And so, you know, we still trail off when the national economy goes down, and it takes us a little while to start dropping because we have a different base than the rest of the country. Our base is agriculture, manufacturing, and services. So, you know, there's not a lot of agriculture in New York City. There's not a lot of...
But there is in Oklahoma.
There is in Oklahoma.
But
there's a lot more oil in Oklahoma and a lot more activity
Nebraska,
that way
Missouri.
too. That's true. North Dakota.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're not the only state that has financial problems too. I mean, if you go to Governing's website, you know, just today, you know, it was Oklahoma and Wisconsin or somebody else, and, you know, they're in very similar situations that we are. It's important to remember too that the state has finally attempted to do some real efforts in addressing the issues regarding the retirement fund. You know, we're still way ahead of Illinois on that. and no, I know the economic benefits designed or promised by this tax cut did not necessarily materialize to the degree many had hoped. That's patently true. But the reality is that we've got a consumer-based economy, and there really isn't a lot for consumers in any of this. And I don't think that this tax plan is going to do much to stimulate further economic growth in Kansas. I think we've got some fundamental structural problems in our economy and how we're centered too much on very small sectors of the economy that when one of those sectors gets hit, you know, you just knock the leg out of the table and the whole thing falls over. So, you know, they're trying to address it.
Bob, hold your thought for a second. We really have to take a break. I'm way behind in the show. So let's take a commercial break. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion.
If you like quality and selection, you'll love Yoder's Ornamental Concrete in Burton. With the best selection of fountains, bird baths, planters, benches, yard lights, animals, and figurines, you're sure to find the right piece for the right spot at your home or office. Since 1984, the Yoder family has been committed in making the finest of quality statuary, the largest statuary outlet in Kansas, located on Highway 50 in Burton, Kansas. That's Yoder's Ornamental Concrete.
We're fast food fanatics, so we thought, why not have a dollar menu at Super Car Guys? So this month, if you want a car, it's $1 down. SUV, $1 down. Truck, $1 down. Minivan, $1 down. With lender approval, anything on our lots is just $1 down. If you've got $1, then you're in luck. We'll get you up, and approved faster than a greasy burger. Right away for $1 today. Now with 3 Wichita locations.
Buying a car doesn't have to suck.
And welcome back. I cut Bob off right before the break, Bob. I apologize. We're just so far into the show, and I've got to get my commercial breaks in there. So, your point.
We'll have to ask the question again. I'm sorry.
We were just talking about whether or not this was a bad bill, a good bill. I think Phil was kind of agreeing with me on the fact.
A little. I mean,
little
I mean, the fact that it didn't generate the economic activity promised is obvious. But there are lots of reasons for that. You know, Kansas is less than 1% of the national gross domestic national product. We're less than 1% of the population. And when something happens on a national level, you know, we can be sitting there rowing our little economy boat just as hard as we can, but if the tide's going out, we go out with it.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that, you know, the Kansas economy has been underperforming for several decades, so it's a long-term problem. And I would ask the critics of, you know, whatever to let's give maybe our Kansas reform as long as we've given the president's reform, which has been like 6 years, and we just had a negative. If we have another negative quarter of growth, we're officially back in a recession on a nationwide type of level. I would say, I mean, Kansas still spends a lot of money. We spend a lot more per person than Texas does, than a lot of states surrounding us do. We spend more per person than Colorado does, believe it or not. And I think a lot of people in Kansas would look to Colorado and say there's a state that's really on the ball in some cases. So I really think, again, that the answer is the spending. And I'm always puzzled by liberals or progressives that resist efforts to look at outsourcing or any sort of efficiency improvements, because suppose we did it without the goal of cutting spending, that we would just like to provide more services at the same level of spending. You'd think that they would be in favor of that, but the state employee unions and everybody opposes that vigorously. They simply do not. The budget bill that was passed this year does include $3 million for some sort of efficiency study, but that's roundly criticized by progressives, and they also criticize that it's going to be done by an out-of-state company. Well, I would say that we need specifically to have it done by an out-of-state company, someone who doesn't have interest, an entrenched interest inside, and doesn't want to step on people's feet and so forth. We need to look at that.
Okay, let's look to the future and what happens next. The governor has to sign this still. I'm sure he will, right?
There's no indication that he will
veto
it. He can do a line item veto, right? So there's no indication the governor's going to stop this. So what happens next? Well, we'll see what he line item vetoes. You know, when they say they have an $86 million in the bank at the end of the next fiscal year, the reality is that's banking on $50 million in cuts to be made still by the governor. Yeah. And so really they've got 36 or 38 or whatever it is, and that is less than 1/3 of 1% of the state budget. And the economic projections from the revenue estimating group have been off by much more than that, simply because of the nature of the beast that they have to comply with. I think the next legislative session is going to be difficult, just like this one. And the most important thing that I can remind everybody about is we have yet to hear from the Supreme Court regarding school finance.
Oh, yeah.
And that is the 800-pound gorilla that nobody seemed to mention on the floor debate of either the House or the Senate, that is standing there in the room staring at everybody, because it's entirely likely they're going to be back there in a special session if that opinion says something similar to what it said in 2005.
Now, Bob, you made an interesting comment earlier in the show. You said there were several of these lawmakers, many of these lawmakers, who signed the anti-tax pledge. This is an election year that's coming up. What's going to happen to these lawmakers?
Well, I think, first of all, the agencies that do some scorecards, like I've done in the past, like Kansas Policy Institute does, Americans for Prosperity does, I'm sure that they will be honest in the rankings. I mean, both of these outfits were opposed to this bill. I mean, they were opposed to raising taxes. They wanted more spending cuts. I think a lot of legislators who in the past had been had liked Americans for Prosperity or so forth, that may be to the end. So there could be, a lot of election stuff. On Twitter today, there's already people who have filed to run against some Kansas senators in Johnson County because they voted for this particular bill. Interestingly, when we talk about election years and the difficulty of getting things done, Kansas is somewhat unusual in that our Senate of 40 members, they all, with 4-year terms, they all run at the same time. I really think it would be a good idea if we cut that Senate in half and, let's say, had the odd-numbered districts run in one 2-year cycle and the even-numbered districts in another one, and pass that bill, then flip a coin to see who has to get the 2-year term, let's say, to do that. But
that's an interesting thought, Bob.
That would be a reform that would be useful, I think.
Governoring's tough, isn't it?
It is. You bet. Been there, done that. It can be fun, but not all the time. That's for sure.
All right, we're going to take another commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about the Judge Riddel Boys Ranch and the possibility it may be coming back. We'll be back in a minute.
If you think about it, the plumbing system in your house is really not so different than the plumbing system in your body. Over time, they both become less reliable. Nobody knows that better than the experts at Benjamin Franklin Plumbing. Hey, Chris, how's the patient?
Bottom's rusted out.
Point is, if you don't take care of your plumbing will let you down.
This one's leaking.
That is embarrassing. For maintenance and replacement programs, call Benjamin Franklin Plumbing.
Hey, Mike, do you smell gas?
Gas? No, not me.
If you've ever hesitated about buying a BMW in Wichita, there may never be a better time than now during the Summer of Luxury sales event, because new BMWs start at just $289 a month, including BMW's ultimate service and our complimentary luxury experience featuring courtesy loaner vehicles, mobile wash, and more. It's the Summer of Luxury at the all-new BMW of Wichita, now located at East Kellogg and Greenwich. BMW, the ultimate driving machine.
And welcome back. One of the favorite topics that I've had on this show in the past year or so has been Judge Riddel Boys Ranch. Seems like we've talked about it quite a bit, but you know, I've made my thoughts on that one pretty evident. I'm
like you're
really
really restrained on other things too.
Yeah. Sometimes I am.
I know you
but
are.
I'm a fan of the Boys Ranch, and of course it went away due to funding, and there's been some talk to bring it back. Some of our county commissioners have asked that the money be put back in the budget to bring the Boys Ranch back, and I just wanted to get your thoughts.
Okay, the Judge Riddel Boys Ranch is one of those things that is somewhat counterintuitive to what many of us think about criminal justice, which simply has a punitive facet to it. It actually is reformative in trying to demonstrate to these young men that, you know, even though they've come from, in many instances, horrible circumstances, that there are good people in this world and that they can become productive members and not be antisocial in the choices that they make. And it's not unlike many other things that we see in criminal justice. The problem is, of course, that when they shut it down, a lot of the grandfathered things they had are no longer grandfathered, and so now it's going to be really expensive to restart it. Of course, I can count on my hand, there's at least 3 out of the 5 commissioners that would really like it. Probably, I can't believe it wouldn't be all 5. The shutting down came from this little feud that went on between the legislature and one of the commissioners. And, you know, I can't help but think that former Representative Howe ran for the county commission because he feels so strongly about this, and I'm sure this comes from him. I think it'd be a great thing to do. I just hope they can afford it.
Bob?
Well, I think Commissioners Ranzau and Peterjohn are also in favor of that as well. And talking with Commissioner Howell the other day, he really emphasized the programming, which turns out to be more a focus on rehabilitation rather than just warehousing the offenders, and you know, like they perhaps do in other facilities. So it's a premium, I don't want to say amenity, but a premium service that has these rehabilitative efforts that they feel really could have a better impact on young people's lives rather than just warehousing them, and that saves money and makes us a happier and safer society otherwise.
Well, and part of the challenge with this whole thing, we've got about a minute left, but I think part of the challenge with something like the Riddel Boys Ranch is it's really hard to measure that. It's really hard to quantify your outputs.
The reality is that when I sit in the bench, and I'm always looking for an alternative to incarceration unless I absolutely have to, and Judge Riddel Boys Ranch is one of those alternatives that gives a juvenile court judge an option other than, you know, send him to DCF custody or let him out on probation, because sometimes they don't do real well on probation. They don't have a home environment that's supportive of reformative behavior, and they end up and they go out and reoffend and they get in more trouble, and the judge, you know, just pull what little hair I have left out sometimes. So they're going like, what else can I do? You know, I keep trying to work with you, but you keep working your own plan instead of ours. So, you know, here's go, bye, see you later, good luck.
Well, you know, and again, it's and this is always the challenge with measuring. You don't know what's going to happen 10, 20 years down the road with a lot of these young folks. You know, if they have some success with the Judge Riddel Boys Ranch, you're never going to be able to measure it because they're not going to reoffend. If they don't have success, that's what you measure, because they'll be in prison for doing something.
I can remember the
worse.
News stories with anecdotal
about 15 seconds.
I know, with anecdotal issues from people that have gone through it and said how much it changed their lives, and you just can't argue with that. I mean, you know, what's it worth? I think it's worth the investment.
All right, we will keep following that story. Thanks, guys, for being on the program. We appreciate it. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please email me at thisweekinkansas@cape.com. I hope you have a wonderful week.
It's a sidewalk sale at Jabara's Home